This is Rooted the Podcast, and this is Kevin Butcher, and I'm the Executive Director of Rooted Ministries, and I'm here today with William Mack, who is our Director of Pastoral Care, and Kevin who is our Communications Director. And we want to talk about pastors and how they are handling the racial wound in our country, the racial tension presently. Yeah, that's what we want to talk about. And we have three different perspectives represented. Well, actually, more than three. We all come from various places and various age groups, but I happen to be a 68-year-old white brother, and Kevin, how old are you?
I'm 40.
All right, 40, the big 40.
Yep.
A
Yes,
40-year-old Asian brother, and then William is a 43-year-old African-American brother. So, Kev, why don't you start us off by either sharing or asking a question that we can kind of dive into?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've been planning this one for a while, so I'm
Indeed.
both looking forward to it, but I'm also, I don't know, it's going to be heavy. I think it could be heavy. But I will say this. I mean, one of the main questions that had come up prior to this podcast happening was, is the love of God enough? In some ways, it feels like it's too simplistic of an answer, especially when we're talking about division in the church, division in our country. We're talking about folks not being seen, folks representing, in some cases, the systemic issues that have been in our country for generations on end. And so, just speaking bluntly, if I'm sitting here and I'm going to go with the cultural tide in where I live in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, Pastor Kevin Butcher, you have nothing to teach me because you're an old white man.
Yep.
If I want to go deeper into my tribe, my Chinese American or Asian American tribe, I could even go as far as saying, Pastor Mack, you don't know me, and you don't have much to teach me either, because you don't know my experience. All you know is your experience. And so we find these like walls being built up left and right. And we're three pastors having this conversation, very aware that this stuff exists. And then we have to pastor other people, right? Then you're taking care of your churches and navigating these conversations, and we're going through our own journeys. So just kind of throwing that out there, is the love of God enough? And how do you function? How do the three of us even get along, or do we get along? Like, let's have some some conversations around that. So I don't know, Mac, as I'm kind of throwing this intro, we haven't heard from you yet. I don't know, like, what's going on through your mind?
Yeah, so, I think preparing for this conversation, I had to check in with me earlier this morning because I feel like I've been a part of this conversation for a very, very long time. And to be really, really transparent, it is exhausting. And so what has prepared me for the conversation was the fact that I'm actually having a conversation with two people that I absolutely love, and I've had this conversation with before, right? And this conversation, although we're having it on the podcast, is actually part of many conversations that we've had. And for me, I want to be a part of this, although I'm tired of having the conversation, but I also want to elevate the conversations that we've had and to illustrate to people that it's not just a one and done conversation, right? That, both Kevin Hu and I, we've only known each other a couple of years. We've come to love each other as brothers. Pastor Kevin is almost like a father, like mentor to the both of us. And we've had moments where conversations have been uncomfortable talking about race. We've had to educate each other on things from an Asian American and an African American and a white American experiences. We've had to have those conversations. But I think one of the things that does not make this conversation with these individuals in this space as tiring as others is the fact that we are able to share and hear each other. That we're actually taking the time, creating the space and going, you know what, I never thought about that. Thank you for sharing that with me. Man, I really hear your heart. Man, I had no idea. And when I've gone back and played and replayed some of the conversations we've had in the past, that's what's made these conversations more palatable. is that I'm able to sit and have the conversations with people who will not debate me about my lived experience, who will allow me to speak to them, even though they are slightly older than I am, and vice versa. We can do the same thing. So I want to hit Kevin's question: is the love of God enough? I believe that it is. Because love covers a multitude of sins, right? That's a good spiritual answer right there, right? That love covers a... Come on, Bible, bring it in here.
Yes,
But I think that it is only through the love of God for our fellow brothers and sisters that we're able to sit in a posture to hear what the other has to say.
That's right.
And then if we find ourselves in offense or we find ourselves in error, to go quickly to try to correct those things. That was not my original answer. That just came up with the podcast since you hit go. At first I was like, no, we need the love of God and we need all these other things. But I think it's through the love of God that we're able to kind of assume this posture with one another, to have these conversations. And you asked me a short question. I gave you a long answer. So I'm going to volley the ball to somebody else on this call. But yeah, I think that it really is love that has allowed us to kind of have these conversations, sit in these spaces, and hear one another accordingly.
I think that's powerful and poignant, William. In fact, I was thinking just of your and my relationship. I mean, I'm an older white brother that has done a lot of personal and corporate work in this area. No need to go into my background, but I will just say, starting by being born into and in an area and raised in an area that was absolutely deep Klan territory. Last Klan rally in my hometown, 1983, and the last public lynching in the United States in a town about 30 miles away from my hometown. So starting there, and through pastoring in the most, well, according to the 2000 census, the most racially divided city in the country in terms of just where people live, let alone maybe other kinds of wounds and hurts and attitudes and defense mechanisms and whatnot. So what keeps a young African-American man like William Mack, who is just so tired of explaining one more time for folk like me who won't do their own work to understand the history of race and not only the national wounds, but the individual personal wounds. We won't even get patient enough to listen to what somebody might be saying out of their story that may not necessarily be my story. What keeps a man like William in the house with me, listening when I might inadvertently, out of my own mess, my own wound, my own pain, my own continued misunderstanding, repeat something that has just hurt him, in his 43 years of journey? What keeps him in the room with me and not just saying, I'm out? I thought this might be different. It's not. I don't have the strength. I'm gone. And I would say, just to back up what William said, it is the love of God that is defined not by some weak, smarmy, definition, but the kind of love that took Jesus of Nazareth to the cross. And as N.T. Wright says, you guys have heard me quote this so many times, took him to the cross, kept him on the cross, and when he said it is finished, that love literally crushed the powers of darkness. It's that love that takes us to each other's feet and keeps us in the room even when offense is shared one more time. So if that's the kind of love we're talking about, I concur with William. There's much that will flow out of that love that is hard stuff and embracing stuff, confrontational stuff, but it's that kind of love that does indeed cover a multitude of sins, helps heal even the sin of racism, not only individually, but I think corporately. So there's my second to what you shared, William. And Kev, you wanna weigh in from your perspective?
My gosh, like my brain's like in 100 different places now.
I know.
I mean, it's so complicated because it takes us to gosh, I think about how much information is out there right now and how exhausting it is to be treated as a resource, to dispense that information over and over again. And just by you sharing tidbits, and with Mack, just knowing that the different areas that you've been in and hearing about that, you're not just sharing information. You're not a news reporter and just passing on information. You are telling your story and how that connects to people you know, the lives, the things you've seen. And so, yes, it's absolutely exhausting, especially if you are being tapped on just for that information. And I think about that too, is if people were coming to me all the time for information, I would be exhausted. Because who's holding the pain that I'm going through? And then on top of that, you're not just asking me for information, then you're going to pick at it. You're gonna say, "Oh, I don't think that information is valid. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?" And I'm like, "Wait. Are you asking me for how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm seeing, or are you here to critique all of that?" Because that's not what I came to show up for.
Absolutely.
Now, that hits very differently though. If it's like the three of us sitting in a room, like if I'm about to drop some of my own perspectives on certain things, on what's it like growing up here in the States as a Chinese American. And you're going, "Kev, I don't know about that." Like, that is your view of certain things. And have you thought about that? That would hit very differently than if it was a stranger coming up to me and saying those things. Because I know where you're coming from. I know you love me. And I know that you're invested in my life. Right? There is a love that you embody, that you have, that is flowing through you into me. And that allows you, that, for me, it gives you kind of that space and that the grace to operate in a way that you're going to say things that offend me, that I may not agree with. But that's very different than just civil discourse, I guess, I'm trying to kind of differentiate here. That's very different than just like, oh, there's a certain kind of rules of engagement when you're talking about this in the public sphere. When I'm sitting here talking to the three of you, I don't have that same anxiety right now, because I feel like it's going to be okay. I'm going to say things that are wrong, that it's going to offend you guys maybe at some point, and you're going to be able to show me something. But here's something that I do want to mention, because I don't know where else this is going to fit, but I've always wanted to say this out for the masses to hear.
Say it, bro.
Okay, here we go. I mean, I came to the States from Taiwan before I was even one. But raised in this country, I was always taught that this is not my country. And that the white man, the white person, is always going to have a leg up.
Wow.
Right. This is before all the media stuff going on. And then I started seeing that play out in everywhere that I went, predominantly in the Bay Area here in California. But I saw that and I found my place. Right. And you guys know this story, but, early on I was asked, "Hey, what do you all want to be when you grow up?" And just like every other good Asian kid, I wrote down doctor, engineer, something to that sort. And then I think I needed to write a third one or something. I was missing one more. So I just said, "Hey, for the heck of it." Oh, I said police officer, firefighter. And then I wrote in President of the United States. Right. And everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, that's such a noble thing." And then I get home, my mom just dismissed it. She was working, 60, 70 hours a week. She didn't have time to look at my homework. But she was like, "You can't be the President of the United States. You weren't born here." And then just moved on. And it just hit me. Like, I just had to internalize that and hold that and just no processing.
Right.
It's just like, it is what it is. Oh, yeah, that's right. This ain't my country. And so I was kind of raised in that space. And so if you were to get me charged, like if you were just to kind of feed me a little bit about like why every other race is out there to get you, why the white man is out to get you or whatever it is, it wouldn't take much for me to just feed that as well and tell you all the stories. But I think something that has hit me maybe harder than it has ever in my life, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, is realizing how much of that same hatred, that same sin, that same bitterness, that same, call it racism, whatever you want to call it, that same stuff exists in me. And I think that's been this like funky space that I do believe is a grace. Because I hear Pastor Kevin here, talk about the love of God. He I feel like transformed my life with a hug in the lobby of a super, cold hotel in Chicago.
It's my superpower.
Hey, God gave it to you. Own it.
Really
You know what I mean?
is.
It got you. You just need a cape. But it's real. And at that point, we're in the Evangelical Covenant denomination. I was part of this association, a bunch of Asian brothers and sister pastors doing some good work and trying to find our voice in a denomination that's predominantly white, talking about good things. But then I met this man. I was like, you know what? You don't have my experience, but I want what you've got. You've got a love in your heart. This is, again, to you, Pastor Kevin. I'm like, that is something that I want and I need. That will actually inform everything else that I'm feeling. And it's awkward because you look very different than me. You act very different than me. Your perspective on other things, everyday life stuff maybe is very different from me. But that one thing, my gosh, like, is that enough?
I will say this, Kev, and then I want to turn it back to William because I know, I just know William enough to know this. His head is also
I see it
with thoughts right now. You can't fake. What the neurobiological community has helped us understand is that our limbic brain, our right brain, where we feel and do relationship and whatnot. I can say to Kevin, I love you, son, and if I'm just in the space where I'm trying hard or I should love you or I'm quoting a Bible verse to myself or I'm trying to be a good Christian, you will sense that. And yet, if that love, and in my case, Kev, I was a pastor at the age of 36 and didn't know that he loved me and almost took my own life. That's when the love of God began to move in and through my life. So that love saved me, literally saved me from wanting to die. So when I hug you, that's what I've got. I don't have anything else. And so when I hugged you, that day when I hugged you, I didn't tell you I loved you. You intuited in your limbic brain, you sensed that there was no BS in that hug. That wasn't a formality. That came from deep in my heart. No wonder Jesus says to his community, you've got to make your home in my love. If we're onto something here, that kind of love can push back the darkness of racism, both corporately and individually, we can't do it without that love, that kind of powerful love being at the core, at the center. And as William alluded to earlier, it's too often used as an excuse. Well, we're trying to love, but we don't want to do any of the real hard work that love calls us to, or some of the real messy stuff that love calls us to, the carrying of our cross that love calls us to. But it's got to be something we experience so that when we give it away, people don't sense we're just trying. They sense it really is from God through that wounded healer to that individual. And that's when the power begins to move in that person's life. That's what happened with us that day, Kev. I really, I don't want to start blubbering here, but I can remember that day like it was yesterday. And I didn't know you. Tell me the weirdness of I don't know you. We're a couple of guys, and I loved you from the get-go, from my heart. And then we had that hour and a half long conversation, and we were off to the races. It's that kind of love that works itself out in practical ways, hard ways, difficult ways that will cover a multitude of sins. Throw down, William. Throw down.
No, I was just thinking about you talking about the love of Christ. Like, I think we have to sometimes check our love and ask ourselves and really assess, is this the love of Christ, or is this my remixed love, right?
Yeah.
Because love will make you take a step back and listen.
Yes.
Apologize when you're wrong. Love will ask the hard questions that will challenge your heart, right? Love will do all of those things and carry you in all those places. Love will make you cast down assumptions and make you deal with some of your embedded theologies. Love will make you apologize and show up better. And oftentimes, if we're not careful, we'll say that we're loving our neighbor well, but we're just loving our neighbor the way that we think love is supposed to be, and it's not really the love of Christ.
Indeed.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I love my neighbor, perfect example, and I won't call anybody out, but perfect example. I love my neighbor, and as a result, my church does outreach to the Hispanic community. But now the Hispanic community is starting to come to my church. So, Pastor Mack, should I bust them to another church? You know, and I'm sitting there going, wait, what did you just ask me exactly? And they were like, well, you know, we do outreach. And I'm like, yes. I said, and you do understand that the reason why now they're showing up to your very dry worship experience is because, not because of your preaching or your singing, but because of the love that you've extended them through the week. And so now they want to continue that fellowship because you met them in a place in love. And you think your response is sending them someplace else where you think that they would, where you think they would be better, when their actions have already told you, we want to be here with you, right? And I had to just kind of challenge them, like, okay, where's your heart leaning in that moment? Like, what made you lean into that decision? And so I think oftentimes we got to check whose love we're leading with. Is it our love? Is it some worldly, remixed, messy type of thing, or is this really the true love of Christ? And the true love of Christ will make you uncomfortable. It will challenge the systems of this world. It'll challenge some of the embedded theologies in your heart. It will challenge all of those things. It will challenge you to see your brothers and sisters truly as your brothers and sisters, and not this broad brushed thing that the media has put out there, or that somebody, all the things. Like, love will have you see through your trauma. You know, I sat with a brother who said, hey, I was bullied by black teenagers when I was younger. And this is an older white guy. And he's like, but I know all black people aren't like those guys that bullied me when I was younger. And I'm like, thank you for recognizing that. And because I love you, I'm sorry that you had that experience with those brothers, because that they weren't right because they were black, you know? So I think that we really have to look at, when we say that we're trying to give, and we're trying to advance the kingdom of God, and we're trying to share the love of Jesus Christ, are we really giving the love of Jesus Christ? Are we really moving in that love? Are we really moving in this kind of hybrid, mutated thing that we want to call love because it's most comfortable for us? Because the love of Jesus Christ is not always comfortable. Like, it is healing.
It's sacrificial.
It is sacrificial, but it is
sacrifice.
not always comfortable.
Exactly.
And I think people take what's comfortable for them and say, oh, well, I'm going to love you in this very comfortable, but that ain't the love of Christ, babe. That's no, miss me with all that. So anyway, I think that's definitely something that we got to do, because again, and I'm not just limiting our conversation to just the three of us, but I've been in spaces where I've heard people say they're moving in love, but your love don't look like my Jesus love. So like, boom, that doesn't line up. Like, your actions aren't matching what I know the love of Christ to be. Even as we look in the news now and how we're, you know, I'm not getting political, but how we just shipping people from one place to the next like they're a pair of cards, and you can't tell me that that's a love in action, right? That just love doesn't just move bodies in space like that without thinking about their well-being deeply. So true, I think we have a misconception about what love is. And when we ask the question, is the love of Christ enough? People were like, well, yes, I've been living with the love of Christ. And I'm like, yeah, but have you really? Have you really? Because you haven't been uncomfortable at all. And the love of Christ, like you said, is sacrificial, and ain't nothing easy or comfortable about sacrifice.
And if the scripture is worth anything, it's worth being a benchmark for what that love is supposed to look like, for heaven's sakes. I couldn't help but, and Kevin, interrupt me when you're ready to throw in, but
go.
I couldn't help but once again think of this poignant little passage in 1 Peter that Kev, you and William have heard me teach and talk about, maybe even on these podcasts many, many times, but this is another moment for it, where Peter talks, he invites us to be one. And that's what we're talking about here, across all these lines that have historically, through much sin, much prejudice, much heartless, I mean literally heartless violence, has divided us. You know, all these ways of looking at people outside of, hey, we're all sons and daughters of the living God. And Peter invites us in 1 Peter 3:8 to be one, because that's the John 17 prayer, that they all might be one, Father, that the world might know that you've sent me. Peter was standing there that night when Jesus prayed that prayer. So he knew it all too well. And so he's writing to the Asia Minor churches, and he said, look, let's live into what the master is calling us to, be one. And then there's like 5 participles or various kinds of verbal adjectives that he lists as being possible pathways to being one with someone that otherwise you might not be one with, whether it's their ethnicity, their background, or the fact that you just plain don't like them. And the very first thing he invites us into is to feel with this other human being who is also a son or a daughter of God. And again, that little Greek word is sum pathes. The sum is a prefix that means with, and the word pathes, from which we get our word pathos or the passion of the Christ, for example, it means to feel. So Peter says the first step toward being one with another human being is to love them like this, William. To love them by sacrificially putting aside our agenda, putting aside our preconceived notions, putting aside what grandma spewed or grandpa spewed at the dining room table, putting aside our political ideologies, putting aside our denominational tendencies, putting aside our favorite commentator and what we think they might want us to say. Just allow ourselves, loved by Christ, secure in that moment, to feel the other human being's story without judgment. I know I'm getting kind of worked up here, but I'm close to saying to swearing, and I know that probably wouldn't be appropriate for certain folks on the podcast, but that tells you how worked up I am. What is so difficult about just putting aside our agendas to look at the person across from us and treat them like a son and daughter of God who has a different journey than ours, to feel with them, which, by the way, to William's point, that's what our Jesus did with the woman at the well, with Zacchaeus, with every human being that had in some way that Jesus could have said, even as a rabbi, he could have said, you're not for me. I need to correct you. I need to instruct you. I need to shut you off while you're telling me your story. Instead, Jesus saw people where they are, and he was present to them. Interestingly enough, guys, and to our listeners, the only other place that Greek word is used in that form in the entire scripture is in Hebrews chapter 4, where the author of the Hebrews says, we have a high priest, that would be Jesus, who is able to feel with us in our weaknesses. So we don't even have to guess, hey, I guess Jesus was kind of like that. The scripture says he is like that with us and all of our stuff. He looks at us, and before he points, before he prophesies, before he teaches, before he corrects, before he works on sanctifying us, he simply feels with us right where we are. C.S. Lewis said back in the day, when someone looks at you that you're with and can sense that you are feeling with them to the point that you or they will say, you too? You've had that experience too? You've been hurt, you've been maligned, that's the day that kinship and friendship is born. What if we just started there? Let's not get more magnanimous than that. What if we were so secured in the love of Christ that instead of always trying to correct and corral and put our agenda forth, we just sat with our brothers and sisters and felt with their broken heart? I wonder. End of sermon.
I need a breather after that one. That was
Yeah.
No, that's a lot. That's a lot
It
to take
is.
in. But so just hearing just both of you just share. Gosh, it's so much. I don't even know if I can articulate this one.
We could do part 2, Kev, too.
It's a big deal. That's true. That's true, because we're already at the 30-minute mark. But
there we go.
I don't want to leave it here, because I think it's important to recognize what both of you are sharing I mean, you can't actually navigate these kinds of differences in any way, shape, or form without a deep relationship with each other. And even just hearing some of the stuff that you were just sharing, Kevin, and I recognize this, even if we don't talk about race, politics, or anything else going on, even just how we preach the word, I have been guilty of, personally, of just talking at the congregation or to whoever's listening. And for very personal reasons, maybe it's out of the best intentions of my heart, I'm trying to beat this into them.
Yep.
And I want them to get it. And then I'm reminded that it's not on me. I can share the truth with you. I can share you what I believe is true and aligned with the scriptures. But the timing of it all, how it affects you, how it bears fruit in your life, that is so much out of my control. And I do wonder why it feels like when I'm talking about matters of like just to throw politics out there in general, especially race, but it feels like that's not good enough.
Yeah.
I need you to get me right now. I need you to know right now. And I think, Kev, this is something you've shared with me a couple of times, but we talk about the civil rights movement and all these different things, and it's like you're talking about all the legislation that was passed, and all it was is that you made segregation or certain elements of that illegal, but you never changed hearts.
Never.
Yeah, illegal. Yeah, you just never. But you never changed hearts. So if you were racist to the bone, to the core, you still were.
Yep.
If you saw people as second-rate citizens or whatever, or not even that, it's still there. And I think connecting that even back to what you were saying, Mack, of you might think to yourself, but I do love, and I am serving, and I'm tweeting the right things, and I've got the right bumper sticker, and I'm wearing the right shirt, and I'm loving. But ultimately, what transforms the heart is that deep proximity, deep relationship, being together, feeling each other's pain. And so, and this is where I think I'm kind of maybe done talking in this chapter, but I keep wondering to myself if we're spinning our wheels, like thinking that we're going to change everything by shouting and yelling. This is my perspective, shouting and yelling and trying to educate everybody, when really it's just the people in my immediate circle of influence that I just need to be in relationship with, for them to understand where I'm coming from and who I am. And I'm not trying to ram it down your throat. Mack, I keep thinking about this conversation you and I had. I think I shared my story with you the first time, I think it was virtually, and you said, like, dude, you're like the Chinese version of me. And like we have some shared experiences when it comes to, just how we grew up and challenges we had, law enforcement, whatever it might be. It's just like, oh, dang. And I don't think I shared anything with you, but I was like, man, I feel so connected with you all of a sudden.
1 Peter 3:8, man. That's what you did.
Yeah, right. And I didn't have to preach at you. I didn't come in with a strong agenda, but yet you're transformed, and I was definitely transformed by those moments. And I'm thinking right now, for pastors, if you were to tell me this all a year ago, I wouldn't even know what to do with this conversation and this podcast. But I think there's power in staying the course and leaning into loving the congregation, continuing to lean into the love of God, and recognizing that is ultimately what you give to the congregation, is the love of God in you and through you. You may not have all the right answers. You might piss a lot of people off. You might not be vocal enough and be doing enough in the eyes of so many people. But if you are loving, like, that will take time, but that will do its work. Yes. I don't know, like, if am I off? Like, what do y'all think about
No.
all the stuff that I've just shared?
I feel like that's it, right? So that's how you end it, right? Dear pastor, lean in to the love of God and allow that love to be the source from which you lead, right? Mm-hmm. And again, the true love of God, and not this, plagiarized, falsified thing that's kind of floating around in the ether, right? Because that is the thing that is going to anchor you. That is the substance that is going to keep you, and shift your heart and how you move, right? As you were talking, Kevin, I was thinking about, I'm an old school Baptist boy, so blessed be the ties that bind our hearts in Christian love, right? And it's crazy. A black boy from the South has all of these ties that bind our hearts together with this Asian brother from Oakland, you know what I'm saying? And then, fast forward, I end up connecting with this white guy in Detroit. But those are the ties that bind us together, right? But all of that is connected to the heart of Christ. That, Pastor Kevin and I, we were just in Denver a couple of weeks ago, and we have stories on top of stories about Pentecostal grandmamas that we were going back and forth. And I kid you not, even though our wives didn't see it, his grandmama looked like my grandmama.
It's unbelievable.
And it's the heart, but it's the things in Christ that unite us together, right? It is those things that are so precious in a world that is ran by the prince of this world, whose main job is to steal, kill, and destroy. Whose job, who's very good at what he does, is to put wedges in places where people who have a lot more in common, he says, oh no, but that doesn't work because their skin is brown. And you need to tell me that God is so petty that he made all of our skin color different, and that's supposed to be the thing that divides us? Not our language, not how we worship, not how we cook, but melanin.
Come on,
melanin is what's supposed to divide us.
Insanity.
That's ridiculous. And so, but somehow or another, we've got people that are saying they're operating in and through the love of Christ, and that's okay with them. And I challenge that. And so, dear pastor, lean into the love of Christ. Allow that to be the thing that you are saturated in, that you are leading from, that you're living in, and then it will then pour out through you and how you are engaging in these conversations, how you are shaping your ministry, how you are preaching your sermons. Like Kevin said, even in just your circle, right? Because at the end of the day, I think what taxes me so much is that I have these conversations when the news breaks about something, but the news never stops breaking. The news never stops breaking.
That's right.
It goes from Trayvon Martin to Philando Castillo to Breonna Taylor to Sandra Bland, and then it's another. Hey, can we talk about it? 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 I'm like, yes. If this talk stops the news from breaking, then yes, let's have the conversation. Unfortunately, the news never stops breaking. It continues to happen. And so it has to be something deeper than just my own personal and emotional desire to want to have a conversation. It's got to be the love of Christ that releases hope into the world, that hopefully my grandkids won't have to have these conversations, right? Or that the Church of Jesus Christ will do a crazy trajectory change, and we look at how we look at each other and see each other, engage with one another. But that's the thing that keeps us going, and not just, the fuel that we use to run our own lives in our own circles through our own spheres. So, dear pastor, lean in that love, man. Ma'am.
Indeed.
All of y'all.
You just brought to mind, William, with that powerful statement about the love of Paul saying, if you have all faith, wait a minute, like all faith? You mean like all faith? And you have all knowledge, which, as you know, the Greeks just valued knowledge. If you have the two big things of the Jewish community and the Greek community in the ancient world, faith and knowledge. If you had, Abraham had faith in God, it was accounted to him for righteousness. So faith and knowledge, if you had all of it, and you don't have this love of Jesus Christ that's radical, sacrificial, and will keep pursuing no matter what, that took Jesus to the cross, Paul says, if you don't have that, you got nothing. So I think all three of us are saying, pastors, just, do you know that love? And you know about it. I knew about it, didn't know it. Maybe just pause your routine and say, God, will you show me that love in a way that begins to overwhelm my heart like it's never been overwhelmed? And then see where that takes you in terms of the racial wound in our country, starting with your journey, your congregation, your community. See where that kind of love takes you. We're not saying we've got it all together. We are in this process. But we know this. We've come to the point where we know this. Without that love, there's no moving forward.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this, and every time I think I'm done,
I know.
you say something else and I have to jump back
Sorry.
on. But I want to say this is it's that love again. This is not just a prescription for white pastors, right? Or white male. You know what I'm saying? Like this is for all of us, right? Because I can speak as a man of color of a certain generation that if I don't allow that same prescription of his love to be the thing that I apply to my life every day, the healing that needs to happen internally for me to even hear anybody else, it's not going to happen, right? So white pastors is prescription for you, black pastors is prescription for you, Hispanic pastors is prescription for you, Asian pastors is prescription for you, and anybody that I missed, that prescription is for you, because it will allow all of us to our hearts to be postured in the place that we need to be in order to be who God has called us to be, to reconcile ourselves one another to Him, right? I mean, it's the prescription for all, right? It's written to all of us.
Yep.
And I think that it's just really important to hear, because I do hear a lot of people say, "Well, I feel like we're getting beat up," or "I feel like we're not being missing." Prescriptions for all, y'all. Take 2 pills and call us in the morning. Like all of y'all take it. Everybody take it.
Well said,
and
William.
And we'll all be better for it.
Well said.
I'm not as polished as Kevin Butcher, so y'all pray for me.
Shut up. You're my hero, bro. You're one of my heroes.
I think it's a good place to end it right here. What do y'all think?
Yeah.
All right. Well, to our brothers and sisters out there. Yeah. Well, it might be a part 2. But brothers and sisters out there, be encouraged. Continue to lean in. This is a huge dividing topic. It's difficult. We get it. We're with you. We're right there with you in all of it.
Yes.
But what y'all don't get to see right now is I get to see Pastor Mack and Pastor Kevin right in front of me. And I look at these 2 brothers, wildly different backgrounds and experiences, and I love them deeply. And I do believe that the love of God is the foundation to all of the different crazy things that happen in our lives, all the different conversations, all of those different things. But I think I'm going to piggyback on what you said earlier, Mac, about the enemy. I think the enemy will say, no, it's not.
Yep.
It's not enough. What you need to do is you need to go out and run yourself ragged and actually get lost in everything. In fact, you're the savior. Let that savior complex run rampant. And you go out there and you call everyone out and you just address all of this stuff and you just try and just dispense information, and you will be empty. The living water will be nowhere to be found. So I just want to pray. I just want to leave with that, just an encouragement. Like, we're with you. We are you. We get it. Let's continue to lean in. Let's continue to lean in together, the love of God. All right.